The application looks exactly like every other job posting on the UK government civil service website. Same exam, same forms, same faintly bureaucratic tone that gives away absolutely nothing about what you are actually applying for. By the time you understand what this job really is, you have already passed a background investigation that reached into corners of your life you had genuinely forgotten existed. And you are standing outside a green glass building on the south bank of the Thames that most Londoners have driven past 100 times without knowing what it was. This is your life at every rank in MI6, Level 1. To even be considered, you need to be a British citizen, or you need to have lived continuously in the United Kingdom for at least 10 years, a requirement that quietly filters out an enormous number of otherwise qualified people before the process has properly begun. You sit the same basic civil service entry exam used to screen candidates for hundreds of completely unrelated government roles. There is no version of this test that announces in advance what it is actually screening for. If you pass, you are introduced to a panel, a competency-based interview conducted by serving officers whose actual roles you will not be told, asking questions calibrated to reveal something about you that a normal job interview never would. For most of the agency's history, this entire process happened by word of mouth, a quiet recommendation from a tutor, a senior military connection, someone who already knew someone. The organization now recruits through an actual public website, a change so significant that officers who joined decades earlier still find it faintly strange to describe out loud. Level 2. If the interview goes well, the background check begins, detailed, thorough, and considerably more invasive than anything most civilian employers would ever attempt. Your finances are examined, your relationships past and present are examined. Any foreign travel, foreign contacts, or foreign family connections are examined with particular care because every one of those details is, from the agency's perspective, a potential point of leverage an adversary could someday try to exploit. You are not told most of what this investigation actually uncovers or fails to uncover. You wait, the same way every candidate before you has waited, for a phone call that either changes the entire direction of your life or quietly ends this process without much further explanation. When the call finally comes, it is almost anticlimactic in its ordinariness. A job offer delivered the way any other job offer would be delivered, for a job that is nothing like any other job at all. Level 3. You are sent to Fort Monckton, a fortification in Gosport, Hampshire, originally built in the 1780s and rebuilt a century later, a building whose military history has almost nothing to do with why it matters to you now. The course is called IONEC, the Intelligence Officer's New Entry Course, and it runs for roughly 6 months of genuinely intensive training. You learn how to select and recruit agents and how to run them safely once recruited. You learn dead drops, how to pass material to someone without ever appearing to meet them. You learn surveillance and counter-surveillance, secret writing, the use of codes, and how to construct and maintain a cover identity convincing enough to survive real scrutiny from people paid specifically to notice when something does not add up. The training extends into physical and hostile environment preparation as well, skills meant to keep you functional in genuinely dangerous postings, not just clever ones. By the end of it, you are, in every meaningful sense, a different person than the one who first sat that civil service exam. Level 4. You are assigned into what officers, in a nod to the fiction the agency has always had a complicated relationship with, still sometimes call the Circus, the nickname popularized by novelist John le Carré, himself a former SIS officer. Your specific role depends on what the assessors decided you were best suited for. Targeting officers analyze intelligence, open source and classified both, to identify recruitment opportunities before anyone has made contact with a potential source. Case officers do the actual recruiting and running of agents in the field. Desk officers coordinate and oversee operations from headquarters, receiving reports from stations around the world and turning scattered fragments into something a government can actually act on. Headquarters itself is Vauxhall Cross, a striking, unmistakable building on the south bank of the Thames, opened by the Queen in 1994, nicknamed Legoland by almost everyone who works inside it, and famous to millions of people worldwide who have seen its exterior in films without ever knowing what it actually was. Level 5. If you are posted overseas as a case officer, you typically operate alongside genuine diplomatic staff, embedded within an embassy's ordinary structure, answering up a chain that ultimately reports to a chief of station managing the entire operation in your country. Your diplomatic cover means the worst realistic consequence of exposure is expulsion rather than arrest, a meaningful protection, though not one you spend much time thinking about day to day. Because thinking about the exit strategy too often is its own kind of professional liability. You attend the functions a diplomat is expected to attend. You build the relationships a diplomat is expected to build. Somewhere underneath the entirely genuine version of that role, you are also doing something else, watching, listening, and slowly identifying which of the people you meet might, given the right approach at the right moment, become considerably more useful to your government than a normal diplomatic contact ever would be. Level 6. The core of the job at this stage is recruitment, not of new officers but of foreign nationals with access to something your government needs to understand. You identify a target. You build a relationship over months, sometimes years, long before making any actual approach, because a premature ask can end an opportunity permanently and, in the worst cases, expose you along with it. The motivations that eventually bring someone across that line vary enormously. Money, ideology, grievance, simple human loneliness, carefully and patiently cultivated over a long courtship that never once looks like what it actually is. Once recruited, an agent has to be run safely, meetings arranged with genuine care, communications protected, the relationship managed in a way that keeps them functioning and keeps you both, ideally, entirely invisible to anyone who might be watching either of you. Level 7. Not every story in this organization's history reflects well on it, and this video is not interested in pretending otherwise. In the 1930s, several Cambridge University students, later collectively known as the Cambridge Five, were recruited as Soviet intelligence assets. Over the following decades, they rose through genuinely senior positions inside British intelligence and government, passing classified information to Moscow for years, while their colleagues had no idea. Kim Philby, the most notorious of the five, rose close enough to the top of British intelligence to have been considered, at points, a plausible future head of the service, all while working the entire time for the opposing side. The damage this did, both to specific operations and to the agency's own sense of internal trust, took decades to fully process, and some historians argue the institutional caution it produced never fully disappeared. You learn about this history early in your training, and you carry it with you for the rest of your career. Every relationship inside this organization exists from this point forward with a small, permanent asterisk attached to it. Level 8. For a smaller number of officers, the career runs through something harder-edged, Squadron, MI6's own paramilitary special operations component. This side of the organization works closely with Britain's actual special forces, the personnel and training culture overlapping in ways the agency has never gone out of its way to publicize. The work here trades the patient, months-long courtship of a foreign asset for something considerably more immediate and considerably more dangerous, operations requiring a level of physical capability and risk tolerance most desk-bound intelligence work simply never demands. You train constantly. You are, at this stage, closer to a soldier than a diplomat, even though your official cover and paperwork may say otherwise. The line between MI6's traditional espionage identity and something closer to military special operations has always been blurrier here than the organization's public image tends to suggest. Level 9. If your career reaches its highest levels, you become part of the small circle of officers who actually understand how the entire organization fits together. The full picture almost nobody below this level is given access to. The head of the service has been known internally since the agency's earliest days under its first chief, Mansfield Cumming, simply as C, a tradition maintained ever since, along with Cumming's own habit of signing documents in green ink, a small detail that has quietly outlived nearly everything else about the organization's founding era. You operate under the oversight of the Foreign Secretary, within legal parameters formally established only in 1994, when the Intelligence Services Act became the first piece of legislation to publicly acknowledge that this organization existed at all. Before that year, the entire agency operated in a kind of formal non-existence, real, functioning, and, as far as the government was officially concerned, not there. Level 10. Here is the detail almost nobody outside the organization fully appreciates. MI6's own authorized history, the official version the agency itself allows to be told, ends in 1949. Everything since then, 75 years and counting of operations, successes, failures, entire careers, remains by the organization's own account, something it cannot reveal much about. You could serve for 40 years, rise to a senior position, retire quietly into an ordinary life, and never be permitted to confirm the specific shape of what you actually did. The Official Secrets Act binds you for the rest of your life, not just the years you were formally employed. Former officers who have written memoirs did so, in nearly every case, only after lengthy review processes designed to ensure nothing operationally sensitive ever reaches print, and some accounts have been blocked, delayed, or heavily redacted regardless. You think back to the civil service exam that started all of this, indistinguishable on paper from an application to any other government department. Nobody in that entire ordinary process ever mentioned that saying nothing for the rest of your life would eventually become the actual job. Every MI6 career starts the same way, an ordinary application for a job that turns out to be almost nothing like ordinary at all. The record includes real intelligence successes the agency has quietly claimed credit for in recent years, and real historical failures, including a Soviet penetration that went undetected inside its own senior ranks for decades. This video was built from what has actually been documented and confirmed, not from the fiction the agency has spent a century simultaneously distancing itself from and quietly benefiting from. Somewhere in the UK tonight, someone is filling out a civil service application that looks like every other one on the page. He has no idea yet what it's actually for. Subscribe. Tell me which level hit hardest.